Welcome to the mom room.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Finally, we got our
know.
technology issues out of the way. I also had a weird mini, I was concerned about you this morning because I went to go message you on Instagram and I was typing in millennial mat leave. And I'm like, oh my God, she's not there anymore. Like she left, something happened, but you changed your name.
Yeah. I'm not taking any more mat leaves. And
Right.
honestly, like a lot of my American followers they've replied now and were like kind of confused by my, like, and I hate to poke fun at them, but like they don't have mat leaves. They're like,
So they didn't know.
well, they were like, oh, no, I guess they just thought it was my name. Sorry about the lighting that continues to change here. Yeah, I just wanted something that as I hopefully in the new year start to like open new arms of my each here, like maybe a podcast or whatever I'm going to do, I wanted it to be more just like something that can grow with me. And I'm not taking any more mat leaves. And I just wanted to get the generation out of it. I do feel like, although I'm very proud to be a millennial, I know that my message is hopefully for people that aren't just of our generation. And I think there's a lot of like people are very protective or resistant to their own generation and then other generations respectively. And so I wanted to get the generation out of it as well.
Yeah, I love that. That's kind of what I struggled with starting out because I was the mom room. And then I switched it because similar to you, I was like, well, I like talking about all kinds of different things. And as you know, when if I continue doing this and Milo is like in college, it just like didn't apply. And so then I started my personal account. Like I switched the mom room to the Renee Rena just to be my name. And then I started a separate account for the mom room. And I was like, all the very like mom specific related things can go there. And then even to this day, I struggle with the name the mom room for the podcast. But so far I've just left it. And it is hard because people start to associate you with that name. And now so many people know the mom room. It's like hard to change it. And like it's not like I went and saw a career counselor when I was starting out and people would be like, well, like try and have a general name because, you know, if you niche down so hard and then you grow out of it, you know, like a mat leave, like you said, you're not taking mat leaves anymore. So it doesn't really apply. It's like the same kind of thing. But anyways, so I relate to you for changing your name.
I mean, it's been a bit of a challenge. Like I'm currently with an agency and they haven't switched my email over. So I'm sure there's still a bit of confusion on like the back end with like brands and stuff, but like whatever, it'll eventually everything will like recycle and I'll sort it all out. But I'm happy with it so far. It's good.
We'll get it sorted. Okay. So you are on CT time. Where do you live?
Winnipeg, Manitoba.
Winnipeg. Okay. And so I just saw on your profile, you went to the Eras tour. Was that in Toronto? Yes, it was.
Yeah, I went to night 2 in Toronto.
Okay. I was there on night 1. And what's your favorite era of the concert? I'm always curious what people say.
The concert of her music, I think those answers are different. I would say my favorite era of the concert, so tough. Honestly, that's such a like lame answer, but they're all so good. I think probably Tortured Poets. I like how she like added so much theatrics to it, and I really respect how much work that would have been, and how she just does so many of her songs, and she does those like real-time outfit changes. I think it's like probably my favorite era of the concert. Of her music, again, that's like depends on the day. I would say in general though, my answer is 1989.
Okay.
Like could be convinced otherwise depending on the time of my cycle, quite honest.
For some reason, the concert, my favorite song of the concert is Enchanted. I don't know why. Like, I just lose my mind, like screaming. I don't know why. Love Tortured Poets Department. And then I think to listen to music, my favorite album is Folklore, which is so weird. I don't know why.
Me too. That album came out right when I was in like corporate finance and a lot of math heavy courses in my MBA. And I remember just like when I would have to zone into studying because I had a baby and I was going back to, I just like would listen to Folklore the whole album through on repeat. So that album does make me think of like net present value. So I don't know if that's like
Makes perfect sense.
best association, but it definitely is like it's so funny how Taylor Swift albums just like have this like point, you know, where you were at in your life when that album came out. And
Okay, you know what I'm finding right now is I read before bed every single night, and at least once per page, I see a word or like a phrase or something, and it goes into a Taylor Swift song in my head. And I was like, okay, we need, like, I was just going to say, we need to calm down. Okay, like, then I start singing that song. Or like one page said the word glittering. And I was like, there in my glittering prime, the lights. And I'm like, okay, I can't read. Like, what is happening to me?
then they added Taylor Swift level of fan. I have to be as a preschool girl mom or boy mom, I suppose, is like my daughter doesn't know the names of the songs. She just knows the part that sticks out to her when we're listening to it. So she'll say this like kind of weird combination of words, and I know what Taylor Swift song she's referring to. Like,
Yes.
Mommy, can you play the Diamond one? And I know she means Bejeweled. Or she'll just start going, I'm drunk in the back of the car. And I know she obviously wants Cruel Summer, but like it's not as clear when even though she's 5. Like, you know what I mean? You have a 6-year-old, you know, they have like their weird things they say.
That is so cute. So the question I like to ask moms when they come on the podcast is just in general what their transition to motherhood was like. So, but first, how many kids do you have and what are the ages?
I have 2. I have a girl that's 5.5 and a boy that's 2.5.
Oh, okay. Okay. And so what do you remember your transition into motherhood when your daughter was born? What was that like for you?
I was anticipating becoming a mom like in the final days or once she arrived.
Like, were there things that you, like after your daughter was born, were there things that were unexpected? Like, what do you remember feeling like emotionally, mentally, like your physical recovery, that kind of stuff?
Did not anticipate postpartum rage. That sticks out to me a lot as like, yeah, there were definitely, and I'm just so lucky I have the husband I have who just like, there was one time where like we really got into it and like she was probably 2 weeks postpartum. We were getting ready for newborn photos. But aside from that, yeah, like I would say just honestly wasn't until my son was arriving that I reflected on those very first, I didn't suffer from it for months and months like some women do, but definitely that first sort of month, I would say there would be things that in hindsight, like so irrationally angry about something that wasn't that big of a deal.
That's interesting because I had anxiety in that short time period after Milo was born. But sometimes I wonder if we're all kind of going through similar things, but it presents differently in different women. So for you, it was anger or like feeling irrationally angry about certain things. For me, it was just like overwhelming sense of the world is ending and like crying uncontrollably because I was so anxious. Did something have to actually happen for you to feel angry, or was it just kind of like general?
I also don't think I had the words that even now because of like whether she was born right before say TikTok started and I think there just wasn't as much language around different feelings and emotions that there is now, or there was, I just was unaware of them. And so I think I was probably overstimulated a lot of the time. I think it was a lot of like, I'd finally get her to like lay down and then the dog would have to go out or like, or, you know, and I would just be like, no, or something like that. Or my husband would ask me a question that is like a perfectly fair question to ask. Isn't the typical like, where do her socks go? Like weaponized incompetent question that men will ask. It was like a fair question, but because he was asking it on top of the list of questions I was asking myself in my brain that he's fully unaware I was asking myself, his question was too much. It was too much. And yeah, so that I did cry a lot too when she was first born. Not so much from anxiety, more so from just like, I remember when she turned 4 weeks old in particular, like just a lot of sadness related to how big she was getting so quickly, which I think was obviously probably hormonal. I had a girlfriend call me right after she had her daughter like about 1.5 years ago, and she was just sobbing from the same reason. And I was totally like in my 1.5 years postpartum with my son at that point, and I didn't want to invalidate her, but I was just like, just sit in it. It's okay. As long as you feel safe, like it's going to be It's going to be okay. Honestly, record yourself so you can look back on this and be like, whoa.
Yeah. Wow. Emotions.
Me. Totally. Yeah.
Okay, so I discovered you on TikTok because of your content that you do around the daughter-in-law, mother-in-law relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Is that my first question is, when did you start social media? And is that the topic that kind of took off for you?
Started social media January of 2023
Okay.
with the hope of just doing. I'm not one of those people who's like, oh, I just started social media for fun. I started it with the hopes that I would spin into some sort of niche or business. My husband and I, for years prior, had started a small woodworking business. He's a carpenter, and I really like the entrepreneurship side of things. But I didn't like how my entrepreneurship goals were maxed out by how much time he had to make wooden goods. And so,
Right.
yeah. And so I wanted something for myself, and I committed January 23. I'd watched all those people say anecdotally, you need to post 3 times a day, blah, blah, blah. And I committed, okay, I'm going to post 3 times a day. I started just posting about like relatable mom stuff. And then there was a trending sound that I was just like, this is like so perfect for the dynamic of people who have a really bad relationship with their mother-in-law and all the different layers that now my content is turned into. And I just went for it. Sort of, there had been some things that had happened that I was like done with that relationship. And yeah, and I just went for it. And then the second question, the answer is yeah, that's what definitely took off. And I, like, after much discussion with my husband and my sister-in-law and a few other people in my life, I was like, yeah, I'm going to lean in and go for it. And with a few boundaries for myself. And I'm here, whatever that is. Like, I would say I posted my first video about mothers-in-law or daughter-in-law dynamic probably March or April of 2023.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like you started with that topic in mind.
Oh, no.
Right. Okay. And
Not
when you
necessarily.
did start, did you think that was something that you wouldn't talk about?
Yeah, I think so. Yes and no. I like as much like I had watched the trending sounds come across my For You page for like years at that point where I could often like parallel them. And in my head, I was thinking of these like, oh, funny. That's so funny. But I didn't. Obviously, I didn't have an account. And so, yeah, I don't know. I think I'm much like a lot of the people who ask the question of like, you know, any of the things. Are you worried your mother-in-law is going to see it? Are you worried about what your mother-in-law thinks? What does your husband think? All of those things I was asking myself. And once I realized that, like, I knew what the answers were to all those questions, I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. And I had no idea truly how underrepresented the niche was. But it makes sense for all those same reasons. That's why people aren't posting about it.
100%. It's something that is tricky to talk about. Did you have a strained relationship with your mother-in-law prior to having kids? Or is it something that got worse with kids or stayed the same? What was that like?
In my opinion, it stayed the same. Okay. Yeah. There was like a few catalyst events that were like, that for me were really kind of like deal breaker type ending events. But yeah, it was, I would say, strained from the get-go. I would say like particularly strained since kind of we got engaged, and like the wedding planning phase was when a lot of the strain started per se. But I'm not there's a lot of people who follow me that having kids was like the catalyst event. Everything was fine until they had a baby or got pregnant. And then it was like total change. No, for me, it was like pretty consistent.
Yeah.
Fortunately.
And how long were you with your husband before you guys got engaged?
How long were we together until we got engaged? We were together for 2 years, just over 2 years before we got engaged. And yeah, so we've been together since middle of 2015.
And is it hard? Like, I've done episodes with therapists, psychologists before, and the topic of having a strained relationship with your in-laws has come up. And then we always talk about kind of like the role of the husband in that situation. What has this been like for your husband? Is it Like, it must be difficult.
It's not. Like, I struggle to answer these questions because I don't want to, like, at all paint him as a callous person. I don't want to paint myself as a callous person either, but
Right.
people are going to gather their own opinions about it. Like, I fall into the category where, based on what had happened when we were planning our wedding, my husband was, like, ready to, like, the clinical term would be no contact, but, like, he was ready to just, like, fully uninvite his parents to the wedding. And it was me who was like, like, wedding, the typical weddings are stressful for people. Like, you don't want to do that. Like, let's whatever. Yeah. So honestly, I think me starting my page, and then now especially monetizing my page, and just it becoming such not only a healing outlet for me, but this opportunity to connect with people, and then this opportunity for our family, financial, all these things, it's just been really healing for him, actually. Yeah, that's the best way I can put it. Like, it's been very validating for him.
Right.
I think.
Have you ever spoken with him, like a therapist, about it? Or is it just you've handled it on your own?
We have never gone together to therapy specifically about this issue, because we were never really, it was never a pain point in our,
Right.
It was a pain point. We were aligned and it was a pain point, but we were never at odds as a pain point.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah. Like, a lot.
So
and
you
I
guys
know
have kind of been like going through it together.
Totally.
And he's been like super supportive. And yeah, and that's always the feedback. Like, whenever I talk about this topic with a psychologist, they're always like, the husband has to realize, like, his family now, like, his priority is his immediate family, which sounds like has been easy for him to focus on you guys instead. Yeah.
Like, it's tough the reason I don't go into it is because, like, I feel very comfortable speaking on things that my husband has told me, or, like, he would never feel upset or offended about anything that I would say sort of on his behalf. But yeah, a lot of what I feel is the root cause as a non-clinician, why that was so easy for him, like, leans into things that happened in his childhood, adolescence, young adulthood. And those are just like, that's not for me to conclude officially,
Yeah.
So I'm lucky. I guess I'm lucky. I also hesitate to use the word lucky, but I feel like I should, because I don't want to invalidate a whole bunch of women. Just like, I've always been a person who's very much like you see on social media, where, like, I'm not like changing all of a sudden, like, now I'm going to have all these expectations for my partner. Like, it was very clear when my husband and I got together that I was not going to be someone who, like, we wouldn't have gotten together had he not been the type of person who was going to be supportive to my emotional needs. I'd gone through while we were working together, we met while we were working on a northern Manitoba project when we got together. And I was currently at that point going through a really bad situation with a coworker. And he had saw how I, like, had to handle that and really advocate for myself. And so he knew that I had, like, very little bandwidth, and also recognized kind of those problematic behaviors once they appeared.
Yeah. Would you say you're someone that stands up for yourself and that has no problem kind of setting boundaries for yourself? Like, I am very much that kind of person. Like, if somebody says something to me, especially when Milo was born, like, I will address it in the moment. I'm not going to, like, let someone say something that upsets me and then be resentful about it. Like, I'll just address it in the moment. Or if I disagree with someone, like, let's have an argument, but we're going to be friends after the argument. But I don't consider myself a people pleaser, really. And would you consider yourself the same?
I think before I started social media, I would have said I was, like, a people pleaser to a fault. And I think I think that's probably changed since I've started social media, and I've become more comfortable, like, vocalizing my opinions on things. I realized talking to your phone in your bedroom is not the same as talking to a real person in real life. But
what?
Yeah, despite what people think. I don't know. I think that I'm still have a lot of, like, unresolved like from my adolescence and childhood, feeling like I was kind of always that person who would like put their foot, like I would speak up, and then it would end up being like I'm not included in the friend group anymore, even though I was saying the thing that probably everyone was thinking. And so I've sort of just really conditioned myself to not do that anymore. Yeah. That said, I'm like very quick to like stand up for my kids or my kids' needs in a public setting. And yeah, I'm probably a little bit more people pleasing still leading than maybe you've described yourself as. I don't know that I'm like ready to get into an argument with especially a peer like in the moment, mostly based on that. Like I don't want them to not want to be my friend.
See,
unless they've done something where I'm like, don't be friendly. You know?
I like by argument, I mean like debate. Like I love like debating things with people if they have a different opinion. I love that. But it's funny because I did a whole episode on people pleasing, and the whole time I was like, I'm not a people pleaser. I'm not a people pleaser. And then I started to think about it. And I gave the example of if I'm getting a pedicure and the lady like slices off my toe, I would be like, oh my God, so sorry. Like I must have moved in a, you know what I mean? Like, or I get my nails done and it's terrible, or like a haircut that I absolutely hate. I would be like, oh my God, it's amazing. Like in that way, I never want somebody else to feel uncomfortable. But also a good example of not doing something that I don't want to do is like my mère lives down the street from my mom's house. And I remember every time I would go visit my parents when Milo was younger and it was a pain in the ass to get him in the car, my mère would be like, oh, stop by on your way out. And I was like, if like you can come to my mom's, like, but we can't. And I'm obsessed with my mère. She's like the greatest human in the world. But like, I am not going to put myself out. Like you can come to my mom's to if you want to say bye to us. Like it's too big of a deal for me to get Milo in his car seat and then take him out and then try and get him back in the car. So in that way, I won't just be like, oh, okay, like I'm just going to do what people want me to do, you know?
I think that like, because I would say I'm kind of the same when it comes to say my own family or my own parents. And isn't it such a shame? Maybe it's not a shame, but like, isn't it such a shame that it's actually the people we love the most and we have these close relationships with that we end up holding those boundaries firm with, but then we end up caving for people that like
in public
couldn't care if they live or die, you know? Like it's so, that's just because that's who you feel safe with. And so you're able to vocalize what you need, but then in person. So I've started to get better at that because I'm the same way. Like there was an incident last Christmas, maybe it was last Christmas or the Christmas before, where my mom was like hosting something for Christmas. And it was just very small post-COVID. She was having my sister and a couple of my cousins over, whatever. And none of them had kids yet, just I had kids. And I had nurse who was like a baby at the time, 6 months, and my daughter. My mom was asking what we were bringing. And I was kind of annoyed by the question. My mom's usually like kind of better in her EQ department. Not that it's an unreasonable ask, right? Like I'm a grown up, I can contribute to a family meal. And I was just sort of like, I'll bring buns. And she was like, Janelle, like you need to, she had other things going on too, which I think made her also a little bit pointy, but she's like, Janelle, you need to bring something else. And I was like, Mom, I'm bringing children who can't walk themselves to the door. I'm the only one coming to this function. So I think what I initially said was like, you know what, Mom, like I don't want to feel like I'm a burden on the gathering. If I can't contribute more, like we won't come. I'm thank you for the invitation. We won't come. And she just like called me instantly. She's like, is everything okay? Like, why aren't you coming? And I'm like, no, Mom, I know you want me to come because you want everyone to see my kids. Yeah, they want to see me, but like, let's call a spade here. Like everyone wants to see my kids and I'm happy for everyone to want to see my kids and they want to see them. But that means I have to bring my kids. And I have a child currently who cannot walk themselves to the door. And a second child in the winter needs like a handhold. So for me to contribute the same to this gathering as everyone else means I have to take 2 trips to the car. Like, and that just doesn't seem equitable. And
it's also impossible to cook anything with 2 little kids. Like, let's be honest.
And so then she like backed off right away. And I was like, why don't we just like, you know, like it's about the gathering. Like, do we really care? Like we could order in. We know that. Or we could do something. And she was like, yeah, good point. And we had a good discussion about it. But there's other people in my life or, you know, the other side of the family where like, I would have just like made it work or I would have said I'm not coming. I wouldn't have vocalized how I felt.
Right.
You know.
It is true. The people that you're more comfortable with. because you're not like afraid of their reaction almost.
Oh,
It's interesting. Okay, when it comes to, like you said, your social media exploded on the topic of the daughter-in-law, mother-in-law relationship. And also it's something that it's like a cultural thing that we're just like, ooh, like the mother-in-law, daughter-in-law relationship. Why do you think so many people, because obviously so many people relate to the content that you put out, why do you think so many women have an issue with their mother-in-law?
such a loaded question, Renee.
Like, I'm just so curious, like, why is this a thing? I'm sure it has like some historic, like, have you ever looked into the research of like that family dynamic, like in history?
Oh, and like
No.
honestly, try to like find a book on it. Like they don't exist.
Crazy, right one.
They don't. It's like sometimes a chapter in like a
Yeah.
psychologist book they've put out. Stay tuned on that. Okay. Okay, like that's such an overarching question, right? I don't want to answer it just with my own lenses and biases.
No, like I want to think like big picture. Like, why is this a thing?
So I think, unfortunately, I do think that the trope and the like mainstream media eye roll that goes along with that relationship isn't doing the actual relationships any favors, because people have this preconceived notion that like they have set their expectations low. So then from either side, when it's worse than that, for whatever reason, they're like ill-equipped because they thought they already had like set their expectations low. And then when it's better than that, it's great, which is good for the people who have great relationships with their in-laws. I think that having a good relationship I think it's this unique place. Yes, there's lots of fathers who are very close with their children. I think historically, especially in the generation we're still living through, our moms had different roles in the house than dads did. And therefore
Like they were the involved.
They were the involved, they were the primary caregiver, they were the lay with them in bed at night, they were the know everything about them and all their different idiosyncrasies. And so I think that in general, in order to form a healthy relationship as a person, as two people who love the same person in arguably the same order of magnitude, just differently, requires both parties to have probably higher than base level adaptability and communication and emotional intelligence skills. It's my like overarching answer, I think. And so, yeah, go ahead.
I always get, like, when I think about it, like high level in general, I don't know if this is true, but maybe a lot of mother-in-laws don't think the wife or their daughter-in-law is good enough for their son, or like they would do things differently.
Yeah, I think
so
that's
it's like they almost like hold a grudge, or I don't know. Like
because I think, I mean, I've talked about this before too. I think personally, I think the reason it's so prevalent now is that our generation, as everything you and I had just sort of talked about, is way more likely to say something than to just tolerate
right
mistreatment, disrespect, etc. from someone who's older than us, which also, in my opinion, historically was not the case. I think people were pretty tried and true that they were just going to tolerate kind of whatever that was coming from like the whole respect your elders type notion, right? Then when you add the layer of it being your partner, your husband's family, it made it even more matter of you weren't going to say anything. And I think that's a shift in our generation. And yeah, I don't know if they're thinking their daughter-in-law isn't good enough or would do things differently. But I think there's just like a lot of like a lack of anticipation that, especially now, in so many cases, people are meeting their daughter-in-law as like an adult who's established in some sort of career outside of the home or professionally, which, again, I realize I'm generalizing, perhaps wasn't the case historically, and added to all the different nuances of why women felt like or didn't speak up on behalf of themselves or say anything. Whereas now they feel like, sorry, I hold this position of authority or my opinion is valued. feel good about my opinions, my work life and my social life. Like, I'm another adult meeting you, and although I respect you because you're my boyfriend's mom, my husband's mom, I'm an adult too.
Yeah.
Respect should go both ways. Maybe that, I think, okay, it's not maybe, that definitely is the case in a lot of the strained relationships.
I was just thinking about how, generations ago, usually mom stayed home with the kids, like being a homemaker was their number one priority. And so if your mother-in-law came from that herself and you're like a working mom, you have a million things going on at one time, she looks at that and thinks like, why are you guys doing things this way? Or like doesn't agree with a lot of the bigger life choices or how you run your home. Or I think even today, there's a huge difference in how grandparents parented their kids versus like how our generation is parenting and doing things. And so that could also be, like a point of contention between grandparents and parents. Although like you never really see, like, why is there no like dad in law and husband, or like, I don't even know how to say it because it's not something that we talk about. But like, how, like, is that ever discussed? Like, have you ever heard that be talked about? Like,
oh, no, I've addressed it in a couple of different videos in my content. I think one of them is actually a video that you had liked, or maybe when you first followed me, actually was right after I posted a video to that effect. And I was just saying someone had asked me why I think that it's so much more common between moms and mothers, wives and mothers-in-law versus dads and fathers-in-law. And I just said, I think it's generationally and just like communicatively how people are raising their boys or have been raising their boys versus how they raised girls. Like that, there's no sort of like storming and norming and alignment that needed to happen with my mom. First of all, I've always served as the liaison between my husband and my mom, although he's now forged his own relationship with her and they have a great relationship outside of me. I was definitely the liaison, but also if she ever did something that even sort of made him like, I've been calling my mom on her shit since 1991, right? Like,
yeah,
I think I think in general, women and girls have relationships with their moms that are either really good because they've had that dynamic and they've worked through it. And so now they're totally comfortable, as you've said, you said to your mamaire, like, I'm not going to put him in the car seat to drive down the road to take him out of the car seat again. Like, you can come to me. That's just not, I don't think that was ever a conversation that was happening as much between
right.
boys and their moms. And so that creates this like weird lack of advocacy for the sake of the relationship towards the mom.
It's interesting because and like all these thoughts, it's not like I thought about this beforehand, guys. Like I'm just thinking of these things as we're talking. But usually it's the women that are in charge. Like, when do you most often see your in-laws? Like, usually it's like holidays and vacations and things like that. Weddings, like it brings me back to like the wedding planning and birthday planning and all of this stuff usually falls on the mom, on women. And so, and who cares about it? The mother-in-law has her opinions because she was the one that did birthday parties and holidays and Christmases and all that stuff. And so it's like they're the two. She used to be in charge and now maybe, we're in charge. And so it's like, yeah.
So that's what I mean about it. It's both parties.
Yeah.
In the sense that like it's like it's got to go both ways. Like so let's use the birthday party or the wedding planning. Let's even use a birthday party. So it's not as like high stakes as a wedding, but so the mother-in-law, because she did so much party planning or that was her role, reaches out to offer to help. The daughter-in-law thinks she has it well in hand and says no thank you. Then sometimes the mother-in-law feels snubbed, and then that snowballs into like, back chatter with other family members about how she didn't even want my help or this and this and this, or she offers to help and then the daughter-in-law assigns her a task. Oh, well, now she's too bossy, or now she's this or that. Or the daughter-in-law doesn't need her help because she's got her own mom helping her. Oh, now she's favoring her own mom. Where, yeah, the obvious answer is the daughter-in-law should throw her mother-in-law a bone and like let her help. it's a birthday party. It's not that serious. But my answer to those types of examples is always, it's seldom an isolated issue. It's like very often this like multifaceted issue that the men or the husbands are often ill-equipped to like identify these little pinches and these pain points and then squash them or address them or deal with them or validate them in the moment. And so it doesn't become something that he's actually attuned to, unfortunately, until it's a much bigger issue. It's again my like armchair analysis of the situation.
So is that what you meant by in your email when you were talking about the content of yours that does really well is usually about these nuanced situations? And when I read that, I was thinking, me too. Like, it's never like the big, grand, obvious things that connects with people. It's like these nuanced situations where they see a piece of your content and they're like, oh my God. Like,
yeah.
And sometimes they don't even realize that that's why they feel a certain way in a certain situation. But they see a piece of content and they're like, oh my God, it all makes sense now. So is the birthday thing, like when you say nuanced situation, is it things that happen in a relationship where it's kind of hard to pinpoint?
They do really well because there's so many okay, but, or what about, like that stem from the piece of content. So, right, like, because it's when you're making content, as you know, you're like presenting it from a particular point of view, typically with your own lens on it. It's a 1 minute. Like, we're content creators. Like, I can't make
there's no context.
Like, there's no context. I can't make a 5-minute video. People are like, oh, well, you didn't say that. It's like, well, I wasn't going to. Like,
yeah.
You know, those are the types of things where people can take a particular opinion or a stance and really dissect it or parallel it to their own circumstance. Like, I don't know. When I talk about the nuanced things, it would be like posting about things on social media. There are so many women that a huge pain point in the relationship with their in-laws is they feel like they can't post about things on their Instagram because anytime they're doing something with, say, their own family and not their in-laws, their mother-in-law is going to get mad because she thinks that their favorite, well, why didn't we get invited to that? And it's like, well, it's not my job to invite you. Why doesn't your son invite you? Or he didn't want you to come. Do you want to ask me why I didn't invite you? Like, you're just assuming I'm mean for not inviting you, but do you care to know why I don't want to invite you? Or, you know, like, well, you never invite us. You favor your daughter's kids way more than you favor our kids. So we didn't invite you because you get our kids books for Christmas and you get your other granddaughter a Barbie dream house. Or like, you know, they're so like
layered.
So layered.
One of the things that you just said that I think about all the time too is that, and I'm generalizing, obviously this is not everyone's situation, but daughters are very close with their own mothers. And so when it comes to the newborn stage, when it comes to visitors in early postpartum, which is something that I talked about, and this like blew up, I wanted my mom there as my support person. I didn't want anybody else. And so my husband, because his parents live out of town, they were in Vancouver, still are. So for them, like, they would be living in our house if they came to visit as soon as Milo was born. And we lived down the street from my parents at the time that he was born. And so that was one of these situations that could have, like, I got messages from people that were like, the visiting in the newborn stage or at the hospital or whatever, like, destroyed their relationship with their in-laws. And
completely.
That's a perfect example of that could have happened. But like, my husband explained to his parents and they were totally fine with it. And I think she still probably has hurt feelings over that happening when Milo was first born. But we have moved on from it. I think she understands my perspective, and I truly understand the hurt that she must have felt in that situation. But I was dealing with my own shit. Like, I just gave birth to Milo. I'm trying to figure out breastfeeding. I'm having raging anxiety, crying all the time. Like, I didn't want visitors living in my home. And it just so happened that my mom and I are so close. I wanted her to be there to help me and do all the things. And so I think that, and then it carries on because I have such a close relationship with my mom. we're constantly going to my parents' place, you know? His parents live in Vancouver, and I'm lucky they get to come here for like a month at a time because his mom is retired. Early on, I started to worry about what you just said, that we're always with my parents, but I'm the one that facilitates this and plans this. And I think a lot of people get into a situation where that's the case, but it's because historically and in general, men are not as relationship oriented or like making plans and doing all the things, but women are. And so naturally we plan things with our family.
Totally. And there's just like, I mean, if we're specifically talking about postpartum, like there's just such a level of vulnerability there, right? Like, for me
God
too,
forbid you already have a little bit of a relationship issue with your in-laws, because early postpartum, like, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
Yikes. That would be tough.
Right? Like, and I've made content about that too. And it, like, I think that was one of my like really first, like, you know, in a real condescending tone, like talking to the camera about whatever, where I just said, like, it's not your daughter-in-law's job to downplay how close she is with her family for the sake of your ego. Like, it's not.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, and like, of course, it's empathetic and compassionate for her to consider your feelings and how you're feeling about that. But like, where's your kid in all this? Where's your son? Like, it's 2024. Yeah. FaceTime exists. He can call you up. He can invite you. If we're specifically talking about the postpartum, there's so many people who hang their hat on like the equity or the equality in it, is that it should be fair, that the like, oh, well, what if the husband wants to visit with his family, or what if this, like, well, why can't he just take, there's been people who are like, well, my husband thinks he should just take the baby and go, if I don't want to see his parents, he should take the baby and go to a different room to see his parents. And like, okay, if that works for you, then that's totally fine. But typically those situations aren't happening when there's like an overall just neutral tone related to the relationship. It's usually because the daughter, it's like she finally comes to this compromise of like, okay, well, if your mom's going to burn the house down, then fine. Then take the baby for 2 hours to the living room and I'll sit in my room. But it's like, that's why my advice to the mothers-in-law, which is never taken seriously, which I can get, I'm not a mother-in-law yet, is like, don't do it. You have like, don't do it. Don't push it. And it's so sad. And I know it's so sad. And I empathize completely. I have a son. I have no idea who he's going to end up with, what's going to happen one day. But you're doing yourself a disservice if you're not planning for the fact that, right? Like my mom coming to see us postpartum, 100% she held my daughter, but she was there for me. She was there to like help me, her child, go through this incredibly sensitive medical transition, emotional transition. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot of mothers-in-law who feel like, well, why can't I help with that? And it's like, okay, if you want to help with that, like, provided your son doesn't like knock up some girl he meets at a bar one night and you have no opportunity to like build some relationship with her ahead of time, you still probably have 40 weeks, assuming he like brings her around. But like, you know what I'm saying? Like in most cases, this is someone you've had an opportunity to build a relationship with. If you know that your feelings are going to be hurt, that she is closer with her mom during the postpartum period than you, put in the work. Put in the work. And it's not her job to put in the work. It would be, this is what I mean about like, it's a two-sided, nuanced dynamic of a level of like willingness and emotional intelligence and forethought. Like, hey, we can kind of put it on the daughter-in-law and say, well, she's probably wanting to build a good relationship with her mother-in-law, but she doesn't have that same like goal per se of like, I want to make sure my feelings aren't hurt when I, you know, like it's, if these are things that are going to be, and maybe you put in all the work, I think that's also really hard for mothers-in-law sometimes, is they feel like they did everything that they could to build a good relationship and then it isn't.
But like, you're never going to be at the level of like, I just gave birth and I'm in so much physical pain, emotional, trying to breastfeed, like pumping, like there's nobody except for like my sister and my mom that I would have wanted, and my husband, that I would have wanted around in those days. Like, it doesn't matter how much we like had a relationship beforehand, or like, it's not, at the end of the day, nobody is entitled to a baby that somebody has just had for whatever reason. Even if you're the person's biological mom, and like you don't have that connection, that support. They don't want you as a support person for whatever reason. Like, too bad.
Yeah.
It's not about you.
That's like, if you're not a person in those like first, call it like the first 5 days, if you're not someone I could ask to like, because sometimes you're visiting with someone when you're newly postpartum and like you feel a twinge or you feel a something. If you're not someone that I can vocalize what that feeling I just had is, like, if you're not someone I could say, oh my God, I think can you check my stitches? And like, you're not coming, like if you're not someone that I can go, oh my God, I think I have a clogged duct. All of a sudden I got a ton of pain. I need to go. Like, if you're not going to help me with like the hot compress and the like, I'll see you in 5 days, respectfully, or like however many days works for you, yeah. But then there's so many good stories, and those are the stories that I wish I could amplify. But unfortunately, the algorithms of social media just like really cater to negative and polarizing stuff. But like, there's so many women, like my sister, for instance, has a beautiful relationship with her mother-in-law and her sister-in-law, and they're not like, so like my sister's way more private, I would say, than I am, and they're not necessarily wanting to be more like in her shit than they currently are. But like, I remember when my niece was born, she was a bit smaller than they planned, and so her sister-in-law's like going to Carter's and getting like the smaller sized onesies than they had, and then like dropping them off, and then like not asking for anything, not asking to. And I think she probably did come in and like have a visit or something, but she would have been fine had that not happened. She would have been fine.
No expectations.
Or like my sister's mother-in-law, like just dropping off some food and cooking, and just like, because some people have said when I make videos about that, or about cleaning specifically, some people are like, oh my God, I would never want my mother-in-law cleaning my house, or my OCD could never have someone cleaning my house. Okay, then like maybe the way that you're showing up, I think there's a lot of mothers-in-law, where I'm going with this is I think there's unfortunately a lot of mothers-in-law who are in the situation where the relationship is strained because of the catalyst of the newborn baby type time frame, that if their support wasn't received in the way they wanted to give support, then they just sort of like threw in the towel. And I think that that's fair. You can say, I'm only willing to give support if you're wanting me to give support in the form of holding the baby while you clean your house. I'm only willing, which isn't support, but you know where I'm going with this, right? And that's fair. You can feel that way, but how your daughter-in-law and your son feel about your level of support, especially when you remember that you're not offering postpartum support in a vacuum. She also probably has her own mom or her sister or her friends who are offering her support maybe in the way that she wanted support. That's understandably going to make her feel differently probably about what happened there with your support. And that's what I mean about the nuance. It's like really tough to vocalize that in a 1-minute video.
Yeah. It always boils down to expectations. Like, we have expectations. Like, my son and daughter-in-law had a child. My expectation is XYZ. Like, I get to be at the hospital, hold the baby. Like, vice versa. Like, expectations of anybody usually will then lead to disappointment, because if it's not met, you're like, what the hell? What? I would just want to say one thing actually about my mother-in-law. I'll never forget this one thing that she said at our wedding when they did their speech. And just if any future mother-in-laws are listening, say something like this at the wedding, because I always think about it and it made me feel so special. She said that, and I don't remember shit else that they said, okay? All I remember is her pointing out that I was the girl of her son's dreams. Like, I'm his dream girl. And like, that made me feel so good. And I think about it all the time. I'm like,
so good.
I know that I'm the girl of your dreams. Like, your mom told me. So anyways.
God. Yeah, you posted, it was like shortly after I had started making content. It was on your mom room page. I don't know how fancy your editing is, but maybe you can pull up like when you're editing it. But you made a post of like, it was directed at daughters-in-law. It was like the 4 things that you think daughters-in-law should do. It was like, and they were all true. They were all, in my opinion, I agree with you. But when you posted it, I felt very like defensive. I felt very
what was it? Like, what were the things?
We're like, like essentially like give your mother-in-law the benefit of the doubt. Like she's had this relationship with your husband before you came along. She's not, and it wasn't in some sort of like any sort of tone or anything. It was just like, it was correct. It was like, you shouldn't have these, everything you said was correct. I'm going to try to pull it up. But yeah, I read it and I was like, felt very defensive. I felt very like, oh my God, but we're all doing that. We're all doing that. And then she still thinks that we think we're better than her. She still thinks that she still talks badly about us behind our back. Like, at what point are we allowed to, okay, we've done these 4 things 50 times over. At what point are we allowed to say, okay, like, you're just not a healthy person for me to have in my life right now, or in what capacity, or, you know? And then at the time, I even made a video and I didn't post it. I was like, I'm not going to go to Renee on this. But I was like,
also, we could have had
but now hearing you like to
social media
debate, I was like, oh, maybe I should have. But then I looked at it and I was like, hey, but you're right. You're right. All of those things are true. A daughter-in-law should do all of those things. So should a mother-in-law. And that's where these misalignments happen, is because whatever these 4 things are, I'll find them. Parties aren't doing them. People are people, right? We can't. That's what I get like called on to.
Also, like, I also think it's important to understand that we can do those things and not have any expectation of how the other person is going to react to them. But like, we can still feel good and know that we're doing X, Y, Z, and it makes us feel good. If they don't want to accept it, they don't return the favor. Like, okay, I have no expectations of what you're going to do.
Completely agree with you. That is so hard for people to do. It is so hard for people to not expect reciprocity. It is so hard. It's so tough.
And honestly, like, I don't have a mother-in-law that, like, if somebody was outwardly rude, or, again, it's usually like I would address it in the moment. Like, we have had like heated debates where like it's something like about politics or like whatever it is, and then we just like move on.
I think, I don't know. I also think like there's also so much, like, it's not, I wouldn't say it's like as common in terms of my like primary like demographic that watches my content. Maybe it is, but there's like also like a cultural nuance that goes along with like, there's like, either it goes okay, where there's people like yourself who like can just kind of take things at face value and move on, and then there's people who like aren't equipped for whatever reason to do that,
100%.
and they like really ruminate on it. And especially if like their in-laws are of a different culture where it is more common to have a heated discussion and then move on, they feel totally dismissed and invalidated. They feel like, you know.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I feel like culture could be a whole episode.
It could, but I always feel so like I don't experience that specifically, and I never want to. I don't want to end up on some sort of like sounding board.
No. It would I would love to talk to someone who is like very well versed in cultural differences when it comes to postpartum and like family relationships, and that would be fascinating.
There's this woman on TikTok. I don't think I follow her, but you could look her up. She's Caucasian and her husband is Chinese, I think, and she just had a baby, and she did I don't know what the term is for it, where you're like locked in essentially, where you have like 30 days. And her mother-in-law did that for her, where she was like waiting on her hand and it was really important to her mother-in-law that she had that experience of like doing only home cooked food and only doing these many things, and you're like not allowed to like do all these things. And she just like kind of let it happen. And it was like such a beautiful series that she like went where her mother-in-law was.
Send it to me.
Okay, I'll look it up.
Yeah.
I'm still trying to look up the post you did about like what daughters-in-law should do.
It's so interesting.
Yeah, she would be a great example of like, you know, like, but also what would have been, because that's where I think the virality lies, is okay, so that's viral just because so many women watch that and we're like, I can't even get my mother-in-law to like come over. Never mind, come over for 30 days and make all my meals. But virality lies in like, okay, but what would have happened if she would have said, no, thank you, I'm uncomfortable with that? How would the mother-in-law felt about that? Would she have taken it in stride?
Probably
kind of similar.
Devastated.
And then so
I will say, and I've said this before, like, your postpartum experience you will never have again, and it needs to be what you want to do.
I wish I could shout
So
that from the mountaintops.
if that mom that you're talking about didn't want that, I would be like, then don't do it. And I would still, two things can be true.
Mm.
I think this mom should be able to have her postpartum experience be exactly what she wants it to be and have everyone around her supporting her and making sure it is what she wants it to be. And I can still feel bad for the mother-in-law that
Really?
she's not going to get to do what she wanted to do.
There's like so many people who had that been this scenario would comment with the like full chest and say she shouldn't have. It's the daughter. It would be that woman's responsibility to not get in a relationship with that man if she wasn't willing to like fully accept.
Shut up.
I know,
Like,
but like that's
yeah.
why these things go so
Yeah,
right. Like
that's
I mean,
interesting.
yeah, so she would be a good example of like that cultural.
Yeah.
I mean, it's even never mind culture. It's just like like all the biases that come into the projection on someone else's postpartum period, whether it's like confirmation bias or survivor bias or whatever. Like, I think that's whether it's the mother-in-law or the sister-in-law, right? Like, especially if a husband has an older sister who's already had kids and the mother or the wife going through all the first-time mom anxieties of all these concerns. Certain people who know it's of no value to like, never mind just like chuckle and roll your eyes at the like absolutely like crazy helicoptery thing that a new mom wants to do. It's like mean and hurtful. Like just let her whatever.
Let her do it. Yeah.
Do it. Like
I never even thought of the situation of a mother-in-law having a daughter who had kids first. And so she's comparing her experience with her son's kids and her daughter-in-law to that of her daughter.
That can be like this
daughter.
That can be like the supersized meal of the mother-in-law dynamic because you're like ganged up on. I have a lot of followers in that boat where they're like a team.
Yeah. The biggest thing culturally, my husband is Indian, is like a food thing. And so it's not that serious, but I always have to, they're always like, have more, like eat more. Like, are you going to eat? Like, I eat more than all of these people put together. It's just I eat like all day. But then their focus is always on dinner. And it's like, are you going to have more? Like, eat more. Like, how is it? Like, they're always, it's so food oriented. And I am so not that. Like, I hate food. I hate cooking. I don't care. I just don't want to be hungry. Like, I will eat a loaf of bread and be like, sweet, I'm not hungry. Now I'm going to go to bed. But to them, like, food is, like, they cook all day, like, in my kitchen. And then I'm always complaining, like, it smells like onions at 9 a.m. Like, I'm fucking annoyed. But it's like a give and take. And it's like, that's how they show their love. And it's understanding that part of it too. But so many times I have been like, guys, I am an adult. I know when I'm
hungry.
full.
Yeah.
I know when I'm full and when I want food. Like, are you going to have dessert? Like, you didn't try it yet. Like, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, oh my God. So it's not that serious, but I can see where it can be a similar kind of situation, but on a more serious topic, you know?
Really, but that gives, like, when you talk about like the meals or like the expectations around, I feel like there's so many gatherings, especially with in-laws, that are centered around a meal. And that's what I've tried. I should make more content on, but I've tried to like really, like, my opinion, I'm like give my opinion out there, which is like a visit doesn't need to be around a meal necessarily, especially when talking about having young children and supporting moms and families that have young children. The meals are hard sometimes. They're stressful, they're hard, they're messy, they're overwhelming.
And people have expectations.
And so, like, why can't we just visit in the afternoon? And like, why? And that's why the geography thing becomes so tricky, because like, especially if there's distance or people have to travel, like, it's tricky to just gather for a couple of hours. And that's why I think it's about, if you can have open communication and conversation, you can find something that works where both parties are feeling at least fulfilled. They're not feeling like they totally were put out in order to facilitate the visit or vice versa. But even with meals, if we go back to just the idea of like how we're able to talk to our own moms perhaps differently than our in-laws because of that base relationship, I found like when I was going to my parents' house for dinner, although I'm very grateful that they're making me dinner, I'm an adult with like a bank account and a freezer, and like a pot and mac and cheese. I could eat dinner at home. I'm happy to share a meal with them. And I love that. But I found that we were, especially for like holiday meals, we were arriving and then both my parents were still kind of cooking dinner, like at least what like needed to be ready. And so then I felt like, okay, Mom, I know you want us to come at this time so that we can have a visit before dinner, but like I can chase my kids around and supervise them and make sure they don't break shit in my own
In a
house.
child-proof home.
Yeah, I don't need to do that at your house. Like if you're saying, like if you want me to come over because I can cook and I like to cook, we'll hand over the baton and once I arrive, I'll finish, I'll carve the turkey, I'll get the gravy done and you can play with the kids. I'm there. But like if you're inviting me over so that you can finish whatever you're doing, which is valid, again, I'm appreciative. So many people get like, oh my God, you should be more grateful to your mom. No, I'm so grateful. But like,
this is one of those nuanced
This is one of those things where like, I don't want to come to your house to then chase my kids up and down your stairs.
Yeah.
If you want my kids to come and run up and down your stairs.
100%.
Or come to my house, bring it. But like, you know?
Yeah.
And so then I said, hey, Mom, we're not going to come till like when dinner is ready. And then we can visit after dinner. My mom is really good about, because a lot of mothers-in-law or moms like us in our mom's generation also struggle with like the cleanup. Like they can't handle not cleaning up immediately. But then what happens is you have these families, let's say daughters-in-law, who son, but like they've gotten their kids already, get them in the car to go to grandma's house. They arrive at grandma's house, grandma's still cooking dinner because like you want to eat hot food or whatever. So, and you offer to help, but like she's doesn't want that or doesn't want to accept it or doesn't feel comfortable, whatever. So then you end up like playing and entertaining your own kids until dinner. Then you have dinner. And then mother-in-law, the grandma, the mom, needs to clean up immediately. And then by the time she's done cleaning up, like your little toddlers have to go home because it's bedtime. And it becomes a lot of people are looking at that and saying, but like, we're not even visiting. Like, what is this? Is this just so you can check a box that like your grandkids came over for a meal? Because if that's the case, sorry, like this is way too inconvenient for me for you to check a box. Let's find a better way. And a lot of mothers-in-law are unwilling to like, let's use paper plates or let's order in or let's
cater.
Like my mom's so good about like my parents' kitchen stays. If it's a bigger gathering and like there's way like my extended family, then yeah, people will chat and visit and clean up at the same time. But in general, if it's just like my immediate family, they'll leave the kitchen messy until my sister and I go home with our little kids and then they clean up after, which I'm grateful for, of course. But
yeah, and
these
are like nuanced situations where people don't want to say anything because they don't want to ruffle feathers, and so instead they just go through it and like resent the shit out of people and dread the invitation because they know what it's going to be like, instead of just having a conversation and being like, can we like rearrange this to be more enjoyable for everybody?
That would be and often is my recommendation to mothers-in-law is like, ask those questions. Really, really don't just leave that door open performatively. Actually, pragmatically leave it open where your daughter-in-law or your son can come to you about the littlest bugaboo that's not working. And then if you're able, it doesn't need to be, a lot of people I think don't vocalize those types of things because it's like when it rains, it pours. Like I'm not perfect either. There's a million and one things. I'm sure my mom could be like, oh, well, when you come over, you do this little thing and then that bugs me. And then we're having this pissing match about who does the most annoying little ism, right?
Yeah.
She doesn't. She doesn't. Because that's when, again, so nuanced, I go back to, she's my fucking mom. She's my mom. Like she's been tolerating shit since 1991, you know? And so she's got a lens of like, yeah, Janelle's going to be Janelle. And that doesn't mean I'm excusing poor behavior or disrespect. I don't go to my mom's house and just like become this like animal. Absolutely not. I'm saying that people are people. And so I think oftentimes what happens is if there is this open door or the son and the daughter-in-law do say, okay, this really isn't working for us, we're going to address it. All of a sudden the mother-in-law is like, well, you do this thing that bugs me. And then it's like, well, then why didn't you say that? And then it feels when it's like, you're the mom, just like if you want them to keep coming, just let them tell you if something's not working and try to be open-minded to that. And I get that it's hard, but
especially when it's like tradition kind of things, you know?
Totally.
People get so like, anyways, okay. This has been such a good conversation. We talked way longer than I thought we would talk, which is fine. Maybe it's the ADHD medication that I took this morning. I'm just like, blah, 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 blah. Who knows? Anyways, where can people find you online if they don't already follow you? And do you have like, are you just on TikTok and Instagram, or is there anything else going on that we should know about?
That's all that's going on right now.
Okay.
Yeah, like, I'm sorry. I need to have more.
No, you don't. Trust me. Oh my God. Lord help me.
Like working full time, 2 kids, like social life, extracurriculars, and social media.
I'm going to have to send you some of my ADHD medication.
You should take some. I don't think I have each. I don't know. Okay, I'm a glutton for punishment.
You will if you get more things going on.
They can find me at Hey Janelle Marie on TikTok and Instagram. That's it. That's where they can find me.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.